Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. This video talks about the existence of DNA being a proof of the existence of the creator. The DNA is a polynucleotide molecule where the nucleotides are linked together by phosphodiester bonds. It is the essential biomolecule of life present in almost all cells, except some viruses. The DNA is the genetic material, thus it is transferred from the parent to the offsprings for the carriage of genetic information from one generation to another. When we analyze the structure of the DNA, it is so complex that it is hard to imagine that such a complex structure may have arisen out of chance. The nucleotides in the DNA are arranged in a particular sequence, in a specific sequence, which codes for many different proteins. This sequence is specific out of the 10 raised power 300 arrangements that are possible if the length of the protein that we are talking about is 288 amino acids. So, for a protein with 288 amino acids, there are 10 raised to 300 possible combinations of the nucleotides in the DNA that codes for the protein. So out of these 10 raised to 300 arrangements, the specific arrangement that codes for this protein, the chance of that occurring by probability is 1 in 1 raised to 300, 10 raised to 300, which is practically nil. This is because of the fact that practically probabilities between 1 in 10 raised to 50 or 10 raised to minus 50 is considered negligible. There's one more example that we can cite here. The probability that the nucleotides will come together in DNA in the right sequence, the specific sequence that is required for a protein, is 10 raised to minus 15. This probability is equivalent to the probability that a hurricane or a tornado will come and pass through a junkyard where there are parts of Boeing aircraft, and the probability that this hurricane or tornado will assemble the Boeing aircraft from its parts lying in the junkyard is 10 raised to minus 15. So the probability that this tornado will form the airplane from its parts is negligible. It's impossible. It's zero. From a practical point of view, it's impossible for a tornado to form an airplane from its parts. This is the same probability that nucleotides will come together at random and form the DNA. Moreover, there is one more problem when we assume that nucleotides come together to form the DNA at random. You'll get stop codons after every 15 nucleotides if nucleotides combine at random. This can be checked in a software program, or this has been mentioned in the Leininger principles of biochemistry. Now, let's come to the complexity of the DNA. The DNA is a code of life, in which the letters are represented by the bases present in the nucleotides. These include adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. In RNA, uracil replaces the thymine. These bases are arranged in a definite sequence in the DNA. as a four-letter code. This if this sequence is changed, the DNA does not code for any protein. The DNA is not just a it's not just an arrangement or a linear sequence of bases. There's information contained in the DNA. For example, there are there are stop codons, there are signal sequences where recombinant enzymes bind at the DNA and they help in recombination. There are zinc fingers, there are other structural motifs for in the DNA that bind to certain proteins to affect certain functions. For example, there are sequences for the transcription regulators, which are proteins. These proteins bind to their specific sequences on the DNA and regulate transcription. Uh, there are also sequences which bind the enhancers, which are proteins that help enhance the process of protein synthesis. There are also repressor sequences. There are also sequences where the repressors bind. These are molecules which inhibit protein synthesis. So as a result, this DNA is similar to a code that has been written into the cell and based on which a cell functions. For example, in the flagellar motor, some 20 proteins come together in a definite arrangement and form the flagellar motor, which works on the principle just as is the principle of the mechanical motor. The information for the synthesis of all these proteins is contained in the DNA, and the information for the assemblage of the proteins is also contained in the DNA. By that I mean that how the proteins are going to interact, this information is also contained in the DNA. For example, one of the proteins will be having a certain group at certain places, another protein will have certain group at certain places, and these two proteins will interact through those specific groups, and those specific groups are coded for by the DNA. So there is some intelligence that has kept all this in the DNA, and this is not a random thing. Similar is the case for other biological mechanisms. For example, the Krebs cycle or other biochemical cycles. Uh, a unique case is that of formation of antibodies, where a unique process of recombination of DNA takes place, and all the information that is needed for this recombination of DNA is present in this DNA. Of late, some people have emerged who say that this DNA has arisen from RNA, and we had an RNA world while only RNA was present. This is one of those circular arguments that cannot explain the origin of DNA. For example, if RNA was the precursor of DNA, where did this RNA come from? And if this RNA was the precursor of DNA, then it should have a complementary sequence to that of DNA. And this complementary sequence should also be a definite sequence out of the possible 10 raised power 300 possible sequences. If we talk of a protein that's of 288 amino acids, so the possibility that the definite sequence, the specific sequence that nucleotides will come together in the RNA is also nil. This proves that there is some intelligence that has assembled the nucleotides together in a definite sequence so that they will code for life processes. This does not mean that the nucleotides are magical. This does not mean that the nucleotides have magically come together. There should be a mechanism whereby we can explain the nucleotides the coming together of the nucleotides, and that mechanism has been devised by the super intelligence that we are talking about, or God. God Almighty has kept a mechanism in everything. Presence of a mechanism does not deny the existence of God. It, on the other hand, proves the existence of God. So, what is the mechanism of the formation of the DNA? The first DNA I'm talking about. That mechanism, if it is elucidated, it does not mean that it has not been created by God. For example, suppose we did not know that about the DNA, and then looking at the structure of the proteins, we would have seen that they are composed of amino acids, and for a protein to form, the amino acids have to come together in a definite sequence, in a specific sequence, in an organized manner, and that would have led us to believe that this is impossible uh, on the basis of probability. There must be a mechanism that has brought these together to form a protein in a definite sequence. So it is impossible by mere chance that the amino acids have come together to form a protein. That would have led us to the correct assumption that some mechanism must exist which required intelligence, or which required intervention that will direct the amino acids in a definite sequence. Now we have elucidated this mechanism that this is in the DNA, and now we have to ask ourselves the question that where did this DNA come from and how did the nucleotides assemble in the DNA. The DNA is similar to the programs that are written by software engineers. The programs form the code on which the hardware of the computer works. Similarly, DNA forms the code of life on which the hardware of the cell works. It contains information similar to the fact that programs contain information, and information comes from an intelligence. This is a proof of the fact that the DNA is the proof of the existence of the God. Elucidation of a mechanism of the formation of DNA does not negate this argument. It only further strengthens it. That the more complex, the more deeper we dig in, the more clearer it becomes to us that God exists. We will inshallah analyze the flagellar motor and other such examples in separate videos. Alhamdulillah.